If you've been thinking about getting a sports watch and you like the outdoors, the Polar Grid X2 might be the watch for you. The Grid X2 is Polar's most compact outdoor watch developed to date. However, it's important to make sure it has the features you need and that it performs as advertised. So today we'll do an initial systematic and scientific test of the Polar Grid X2. By the way, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now before getting to the testing, let's go over all the details of the Grid X2 and how it's different from other recent Polar watches. Basically, the Grid X2 combines the core features of the Polar outdoor range, so navigation capabilities, the sensor set and specialized tools for training and recovery within a smaller, lighter and more affordable form factor than earlier models in this category. Now Polar has actually taken a very interesting approach with all its recent models, where they basically incorporate mostly the same hardware and firmware in every single model, no matter the price point, and it's mostly the design and materials that are different. For instance, the $400 Polar Vantage M3 has basically the same sensor set as the $750 Polar Grid X2 Pro. Of course, the screen size, materials, battery, all of these can be different, but the performance should basically be the same. And the new Polar Grid X2 we're testing today is no exception. And the main difference actually between the new Polar Grid X2 and the previous Grid X2 Pro is the more compact and lightweight form factor, making it suitable for people who previously found these outdoor models to be too large and uncomfortable. Despite the smaller size, it still has all the full range of premium navigation, mapping and biosensing features found in Polar's flagship devices, including the same Polar Elixir sensor set and the same battery replacement service through Polar. The amount of internal storage is still the same at 32 gigabytes, which was designed to support large map files and also extensive data logging for users who require long-term navigation and training tracking. And in some way, I've really got to hand it to Polar in that regard. Compared to Garmin, for instance, which tries to differentiate its models as much as possible both in hardware and firmware, this is actually really good. It makes sense from a business perspective the way Garmin does it, but since the devices are technically capable of it, it feels nice that Polar just unlocks all of it. Now there are different types of watches that Polar makes. I would say there's more everyday wear watches, which includes the Vantage V3 and M3, and then the Grid X2 Pro was really made for outdoor users, and the Grid X2 is sort of a mix between both. It's designed more for users who demand both rugged durability for harsh conditions and a wearable device that's suited for continuous everyday use, including those with smaller wrist sizes or those who've previously found outdoor watches to be too bulky, and I count myself amongst those people with relatively small wrists, for which the Grid X2 Pro was actually a bit too large. Now the Grid X2 might be better, I'll look at it in a second. In terms of physical specs, the Polar Grid X2 measures in at 45mm in diameter and 12.5mm thick, and it weighs in at 62 grams with the wristband or 39 grams without it, and the non-metric specs my editor Alex will put right here. Now the display has a 1.2H AMOLED screen with a resolution of 416 by 416 pixels. Now the screen is protected by sapphire crystal glass, providing some scratch resistant, and Polar says it has high visibility under various lighting conditions, including bright sunlight, though I currently haven't gotten the brightness value from them. The bezel's made of stainless steel and features compass markings. The watch is water resistant up to 50 meters and it's certified to meet some military standard called MIL STD 810H, basically meaning it's tested for durability during extreme temperatures, humidity, altitude shock and immersion scenarios. Now the wristband is a standard 22mm silicone band with quick release spring bars, and it's charged with a USB-C cable using the Polar Charge 2.0 system. In terms of battery life, it's pretty good. The Grid X2 offers up to 30 hours continuous use in performance training mode and up to 90 hours in eco training mode, and up to 7 days when used in standard smartwatch mode. And as I mentioned before, the watch includes 32 gigabytes of internal storage for offline maps, routes and training data. For navigation and outdoor activities, the watch is equipped with dual frequency GPS using an integrated ring antenna to potentially improve satellite reception, and we'll do a first test in this video. It comes with full color offline topographical maps with coverage for Europe and North America pre-installed. Now the native navigation system already supports turn-by-turn guidance for any route imported to the device without requiring third-party applications. Users can also access breadcrumb trail tracking, real-time elevation profiles, a built-in barometer, and a dedicated compass view. Strava route synchronization is for sure also supported. I actually emailed them now about Komoot and a few more details, and if I get that information, I'll put it right here, or future Rob will put a quick segment right here. Hi there, Rob from the future here. I'm actually at work, but I had a couple of questions for Polar and they just answered them, so I wanted to share them with you before the Grid X2 actually releases. So first of all, I asked them about US availability because they only gave me prices in British pounds and in euros, and actually the Grid X2 will not immediately be available in the US, and the price in the US will only be known closer to the US launch. I'll keep you updated on that. Then second, I asked about the nits, so the intensity of the display, and they say it's 1500 nits, so it should be decently visible in a more bright sunlight environment. That's also my experience so far. And finally, I asked about Komoot and Komoot compatibility, and Komoot is compatible. You can upload routes via Komoot, via Strava, or in other ways, but the turn-by-turn navigation is now actually internal to the Grid X2, and you don't need a Komoot subscription anymore. You can use Komoot, but you don't have to, so that's actually a good improvement. And then finally, I asked about a detailed comparison between the Grid X2 and the Grid X2 Pro, and I actually can show you right here what that looks like. So in this table right here, they're actually showing us all the differences. So on the left, we have the Grid X2, and on the right, the Grid X2 Pro, and these are the things they have in common in the middle, and the differences are on the left and the right. I would say the main differences are the water resistance. So the Grid X2 doesn't have the exact same waterproofing as the Grid X2 Pro. Then there's of course the display things, the straps, the weight, the battery life, and maybe some material things. But otherwise it's mostly the same device, I would say. So that was a quick update from the future. I have to get back to work, and I'll send you back to the past, Rob. Now the Grid X2 runs on the same software platform as the Grid X2 Pro, Vantage V3 and Vantage M3, so it's fully compatible with Polar's current and upcoming feature updates. Now there are a bunch of different proprietary algorithms and software features that Polar includes with the watch, and I'll try to summarize what you get. You get the Training Load Pro for measuring the strain of the individual training sessions and long-term training tolerance, Recovery Pro and an orthostatic test, which is Polar's recovery tracking system that lets you know if your cardio system is recovered and ready for cardio training, and the related nightly recharge for overnight recovery evaluation. For sleep, there's also Sleep Plus stages for analyzing your sleep architecture, Sleep-Wise for assessing the effect of sleep on daytime alertness, and FitSpark for daily personalized workout suggestions based on fitness and recovery status. Now, additional tools also include a running program with wrist-based running power, running index for aerobic fitness progress tracking. There's also FuelWise and energy sources for intelligent fueling reminders and macronutrient breakdown, Hill Splitter for detecting uphill and downhills during outdoor sessions, and a wide array of activity-specific metrics. Swing functions, for instance, include pace, stroke, style, distance, and rest tracking. In total, the Grid X2 supports over 170 sports profiles and various dedicated performance tests. Now, voice guidance is available during workout when used with a connected phone, and all relevant training, recovery, and health data is integrated into the Polar Flow ecosystem with synchronization access through mobile and web platforms. That was a lot. I'm almost done, I promise. Let's finish it off and then get to the testing. Like the Grid X2 Pro, the Vantage V3 and the Vantage M3, the Grid X2 also uses the Polar Elixir platform, so that's a sensor set. This basically describes all the sensors in the watch. This system integrates multiple sensors that includes the 4th generation optical heart rate monitoring, wrist-based electrocardiogram or ECG, the oxygen saturation sensor, and continuous skin temperature tracking. And of course, the Grid X2 is a smartwatch, which supports call, message, and app notifications, basic music control when paired with a smartphone, weather forecasts, a flashlight feature, but that's only using the screen of the watch, customizable widgets and watch faces, and ongoing over-the-air software updates. Now, the Grid X2, of course, integrates directly with Polar Flow, which is the Polar app and also a website, and it's the central way you view and analyze your data, you plan your training, you look at your sleep, your routes, etc. There's actually also integration with Training Peaks, and I previously mentioned Strava, which includes turn-by-turn navigation. It also can connect with third-party Bluetooth sensors like heart rate, cycling, and power measurements. And finally, you can also sync your data to Apple Health, Google Fit, and MyFitnessPal. Now, luckily, almost all features in the Polar app are free, but access to the Polar Fitness program is subscription-based, and it's available through Polar Flow as well. And for those of you that like the nitty-gritty details, I'll list the 2 most important ones. First of all, battery capacity, which is 310 milliamp hours. And second, for navigation, supported satellite systems include Galileo, GLONASS, QZSS and Beidou. The launch price of the device is 480 euros, and I suspect the price will be similar in dollars. The Polar hasn't confirmed that at the time that I'm recording this right now, and the watch launches in night black and brown copper color variants. So in summary, the Grid X2 basically offers the exact same core feature set as the brand's higher-end outdoor watch, but in a device that prioritizes slightly more comfort and smaller size, but still tries to maintain durability. At least that seems to be how Polar is framing this device. But is it actually any good in the real world? With this video's initial test, we'll at least get a first impression of that. I've actually just received the Grid X2 about an hour ago or so, and I haven't even taken it out of the box yet. So let's do that now, set it up and do a few exercises with it. I'll for sure do an indoor ride and a short run today, maybe a short bike ride today or tomorrow, and maybe a few more exercises tomorrow, and we'll see how it does compared to a reference device. Next, I'll sleep with the device for 1 or 2 nights. I mean sleep with the device on, not sleep with the device in that other way. And I'll actually compare its sleep stage tracking performance to the Z-Max EEG device, which was made for sleep stage tracking and can actually measure my brain waves. Finally, I'll show you some GPS running tracks just to get a feel for how the GPS is performing. I can't do my full-on test yet, that might come in a future video, but you'll at least get a first good impression of how the Grid X2 performs. So let's get to it, and as I said, let's start with the heart rate tracking performance. But in order to do that, we need to unbox it, set it up and all that jazz. But let's do that on the overhead view right there behind me. Okay, so let's move over to the desk to unbox everything. Okie dokie, let's see what it actually looks like. Now it's basically standard Polar packaging. I honestly don't care too much about the packaging, but I do want to know what the device actually looks like. Yeah, and the size is really a lot smaller than the Grid X2 Pro version, and this one seems much better for most of us. I really don't like those kind of clunky watches, and this looks a lot better size-wise. Let me grab my Grid X2 Pro so we can compare it. My Grid X2 Pro actually won't charge for some reason. Polar will send me a replacement, but just to compare the size, there we go. So if we put them side by side, you can really see the difference between the two. I can put them on my wrists as well to see the difference. Maybe my editor Alex can put those side by side, but this is what it looks like. I'll put it right down here to have the new Grid X2 on my wrist, where you can actually see still a bit of my wrist on this side and on this side. And now comparing that to the Grid X2 Pro. So this is the Grid X2 Pro, and you can clearly see quite a big difference in size, I would say. There's no extra space left over on the top and bottom, and it's just really a lot bigger. But as I said, my Grid X2 Pro is broken at the moment, so we can't do a comparison between the two directly. But as I said, the sensors are actually the same. So putting those side by side, you can see it's the exact same sensor set in both devices. So let's turn this puppy on and see how well it does in my testing. There we go. All right, I'll grab one of my phones and get this set up. I've had some problems one time with one of my Polar devices, but hopefully now the syncing and connecting goes without problems. Okay, while that is going through an update, I'll actually install a bicep band on my Whoopstrap MG, so I can keep wearing that as well, and I'll get back to you once all of this is done. All right, that all seems to have worked. Let's get a little bit of an introduction. So this is what the watch looks like on my wrist. I actually quite like it. I'm actually not the biggest fan of these kind of compass indications, but it's fine. That's what it's supposed to be used for. So let's do a few exercises now. But first, actually this strap here is quite long on me. Let's see if Polar included a second shorter strap as well. Yes, luckily they did, because I don't have such a big wrist. So this difference is pretty clear. I definitely need this shorter version. Definitely a better fit for me. This is a watch I could see myself wear on a daily basis. As I said, I don't necessarily like the bezel, but otherwise I really like the design. But let's now get to testing it. So the first exercise I want to do is some indoor cycling. So I have my stationary bike right there. So a nice setup for that. We'll do an indoor bike ride, not a very heavy one because I also want to go outside to go for a run. And either now or maybe tomorrow I'll also go for a bike ride, maybe do one more indoor cycling session, and then we'll get to analyzing the data. So let's get to it. So I had a quick look while cycling at the watch, and it seems at least like the heart rate according to the watch mostly matched the ECG chest strap, but we'll analyze that data in a second on the computer. Let's first go for an outdoor run, then I have both of those exercises. We'll look at them on the computer, do the whole data science thing, and then tomorrow or the day after probably we're gonna do a bunch of more exercises, and then I'll give you my conclusions. And of course we're gonna look at the sleep stage tracking and the GPS tracking. I need something to eat first, then we'll go for that run, and then I'll come back to you. By the way, as regular viewers will know, I really love my coffee, but given that it's already 4:17 right now, I'll need to make myself a decaf instead. And if you're wondering why it's so noisy right now, it's my friend right here cleaning for me. I really love these robot vacuum cleaners, but if you know of a better one than that one, let me know, because it's okay, but not amazing anymore. That was quite a nice run, short but sweet. I couldn't say exactly how well the watch did. It seemed to be doing okay the few times that I compared to the reference, but we're really gonna need to do that data analysis in a second. I could see it in the relatively bright sunlight, so that's good. But before looking at the data, I should mention that if you want to support the channel, it would be great if you subscribe if you haven't already, and otherwise like this video, leave a comment. Or another way of supporting the channel is by using one of my affiliate links below. For instance, for the Runner app, which is my running coach that I use. So I'm originally a cyclist, not a runner. I'm trying to get more into running. So I use the Runner app, which is both a running coach for planning the runs, and during the runs it will on your watch show you your different paces, or on your phone. So I really love that. Or if you want to track your glucose levels and find out which foods for you cause big glucose spikes, that's something I'm interested in myself, use the Levels app. It's my favorite app for both food tracking and tracking my glucose levels, and getting an understanding which foods for me are the ones that really peak my energy levels but then also dip it afterwards. And especially during working days I want to optimize this. Both my affiliate link to the Levels app and the Runner app give you the best deal possible. And if you buy anything at all on Amazon, there's also an affiliate link for that below. But let's now get to the results. I'll first do some stretching, then depending on how fast I can do the analysis, I'll either look at that with you today or tomorrow. Good morning. I didn't have the time to show you the data yesterday, but they're quite interesting. I did all the analysis and I think they actually make a lot of sense. So let's take a look at those. I'll also do a weightlifting session today and show you those results as well, and then later today I'll go for a short bike ride, and those results I'll share with you tomorrow, combined with also the sleep test results, and then probably I'll do the GPS testing today. But as always, let's first make a quick espresso and then I'll show you all the results. Just in case you're curious, here's some of the code I used to analyze that data, and the results are automatically generated. So we should have the results right here. So let's take a look. And as always, we'll start by looking at the results for spinning. And these are the results for that one spinning session. So let me guide you through it. So right here's that overview for indoor cycling. So this is only a single indoor cycling session where we want the points to be as close to the blue line as possible. So along the horizontal axis, we have the heart rate according to the reference device, which is an ECG chest strap by Polar, which has been shown to be really accurate for heart rate tracking. And along the vertical axis, we have the heart rate according to the Polar Grid X2. So each dot is a matching measurement, with here along the horizontal axis, the value according to the Polar H10, and on the vertical axis, the Grid X2. And as I said, we want those points to be as close to the blue line as possible, because that indicates perfect agreement. And overall, it looks okay-ish, I would say. So most of the time, the points are on or close to the blue line, so that's good. So there's quite a few points right here, close to the blue line, also here, here, and even in the lower range. But there seem to be sort of 2 strands of points away from the blue line, indicating that in some moments it might have had a delay in picking up on a decrease and increase in heart rate. If it's below the blue line, that means it detected a too low heart rate, and above the blue line a too high heart rate. And these kind of patterns where we sort of have a ribbon of points often indicates a delay in picking up a change in heart rate. But let's take a look at the session itself to see what's going on. By the way, I shouldn't forget this correlation, the R value up here is 0.86. So the correlation is a metric that sort of indicates the agreement between the reference device and the watch. And 0.86 for cycling indoors is not amazing, but also not terrible. It's sort of in the lower to middle end of devices, but we'll check that in a second. Let's first look at the session itself. And here we have the spinning session itself with in blue-green the heart rate according to the reference device, and in red the heart rate according to the Polar Grid X2. And as you can see, overall there's quite a good agreement. So we see that mostly the red line follows along well with the blue-green line. There's just always a delay in picking up an increase and also a decrease in heart rate sometimes. But mostly this increase is slightly delayed. So right here, for instance, when I did an interval, there was a delay in picking up on that increase in heart rate. Also right here and also right here. There always appears to be that delay. And sometimes there's also a delay in picking up that decrease in heart rate, like right here, for instance. Those are the reasons we saw those points below and above the blue line. So when there's a change in heart rate, it will take some time for the watch to pick up on that. But otherwise, it's not bad, actually. It's actually not as good as some other devices out there, which is pretty clear from this overview right here. So this overview indicates how this device, the Polar Grid X2, compares to many other devices out there. So we're using that correlation value I showed you before along the horizontal axis, and I ordered the watches from worst to best along the vertical axis. So the better the agreement with the reference device, the more to the top right the device is. And as you can see, that correlation of 0.86, I think it was here in the Polar Grid X2 marked in red, is not amazing, though not terrible. So there's a lot of worse devices out there, at least a few, and it's sort of in that middle to lower end of devices. But let's zoom in a little bit so we can read those labels better. So that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And here we have the Polar Grid X2 marked in red again. And it's not that far away from, for instance, the Polar Grid X2 Pro right here, or for instance, the Polar Vantage M3 right here. And we also have the Polar Vantage V3 right here. So these are all devices with the same sensor, the V3, the Grid X2 Pro, the M3 and the Grid X2. All of these devices have the same sensor and are performing about the same. Of course, this is a very initial test for the Polar Grid X2, but it seems that no matter which of these devices you get, you're getting about the same performance for indoor cycling, at least based on this very initial test. And this is not surprising to me. Same sensor, same results. It's okay, though not the best out there. In this case, mostly because of that delay in picking up on increases and decreases in heart rate. But still, since I had quite quick changes in heart rate, which many of you won't have to that degree because I actually stopped cycling for a moment to have that really quick drop in heart rate because I really want to put these watches through their paces. For normal usage, I think for indoor cycling, all these devices are probably good enough. But let's now take a look at the results for running outside. And here we have the overview for that run that I did yesterday. And this actually looks quite good. Most points are on or close to the blue line. There's a little bit of deviation, especially here below the blue line. There's this ribbon of points below it. Again, indicating to me that likely there was a delay in picking up on an increase in heart rate, at least for one of the intervals. But overall, this is not too bad. There's no clear signs of cadence loss, at least not based on this overview right here. And the correlation is okay, though again not great at 0.91. But here we really need to take a look at the individual run to see what's going on. And here we have that interval run that I did. And the results are actually not bad at all because this is quite a challenging run. Several watches that I tested didn't really have intervals, so were a bit easier to track my heart rate. But here we can see that the Polar Grid X2 didn't do that bad actually. It was almost perfect for the first half. And for a few moments here, detected a too high heart rate. And we can also see right here, it somehow detected a decrease in heart rate and then had a delay in picking up on that increase, which is why we saw that ribbon of points below the blue line. But otherwise, this isn't bad at all. It's not perfect, but this would be good enough for me. It's a single run, so a very initial test, but I'm very happy with this result. But let's now compare this correlation, so the 0.91 or 2 that we saw, to that of many other devices out there. And here we have that overview for running outside. Again, for many other devices out there, I did many more runs. So the results here for the Polar Grid X are really initial results. but they're looking quite okay, I would say. Many devices are doing quite a bit worse than the Grid X2. There are definitely better devices out there, especially Apple Watches and some Huawei devices, and also the Pixel Watch 3, which isn't in this overview by accident. I still have to add that data, but as was clear from my review of the Pixel Watch 3, it really did well as well. So in general, for heart rate tracking, the top 3 brands on me are Apple, the Pixel Watch 3, and some Huawei devices. But in this case, the Polar Grid X2 actually didn't do bad at all. I'm quite happy with that result. If we look at, for instance, the M3, it isn't that far away, and this makes some sense to me because it has the same sensor and also is in a somewhat similar weight class, I would say. I don't think I tested the Polar Grid X2 Pro for running, at least not that I remember. This is quite a bit of a heavier watch, so I could imagine it struggles quite a bit more with running because it would rock quite a bit more on my wrist, whereas the Grid X2 and the Vantage M3 are quite a bit more stable on my wrist. So overall, not a bad result. Let's quickly check and make sure there's no other Polar devices with the same sensor in this overview. So the Polar Ignite 3 actually has a different sensor. So overall, a decent result, I would say. It's not the best out there, but this would be good enough for me. I'd actually be interested to hear about your experience. Did you test any of the Polar devices like the Vantage V3, the Vantage M3, or the Grid X2 Pro for running? And did it do well for you? Well, let us know in the comments below. Next, I actually want to do a weightlifting session, which I'll do today, so I don't have the results yet. But first, I actually want to take a look at the GPS tracking results. Now, I cannot do my normal GPS tracking because my normal GPS tracking involves like 6 to 10 different bike rides, and I just don't have the time before release to do that analysis because Polar sent this to me just a few days before the watch comes out. But what we can do is look at that run yesterday where I tried to run the exact same circle multiple times and look at how well those overlap. So right here you can see that very exciting run that I did just running in circles for a while. But overall, if you look at the consistency between those tracks, that's actually quite good. So bad GPS trackers often go all over the place. And here we can see that the tracks are more or less consistent. Yes, there's sometimes some deviation, like right here, for instance. But overall, this is not bad, especially since Polar will not be aware that I can run here. So they cannot rely on maps data to actually push me towards the road or something because there's no clear road indication right here. So overall, at least as a first indication, the consistency between these tracks is quite good because the distance between the tracks right here is quite narrow. I'm quite happy with this result. Of course, running is a bit easier than cycling just because the speed is lower. And there's not a lot of obstacles right here, though I have to say right here, this wall is quite tall. So on this side, there's a quite tall wall where I can actually see on my Garmin that it sometimes struggles a bit. So all of a sudden my pace really changes a lot when I run right here. And Polar doesn't seem to have suffered here. I'm actually interested. Let's compare the distance as tracked by the Polar watch to my Garmin Fenix 7 Pro and how that compares to my smartwatch. So my iPhone 15 Pro Max, I think I have. So let me quickly look up those numbers and we'll compare those. According to my Garmin Fenix 7 Pro, which I think is set to the most accurate GPS setting, the total distance ran is 6.2 kilometers. According to my Grid X2, the total distance ran is 6.15 kilometers, so really close to each other. I'm quite happy with that result, knowing that my Fenix 7 Pro is quite accurate and that there's quite a good agreement between the Polar Grid X2 and the Fenix 7. That at least gives me some extra confidence in the GPS tracking performance. Actually, my phone tracked a bit of a longer distance, so 6.38. I'm actually not that sure about the performance of the GPS tracking of my phone. We can actually compare that to this phone as well. So I also tracked it with my Whoop strap, which uses the internal GPS of the phone. So let's see what that said. Okay, actually, interestingly, according to my other iPhone 13 mini, I ran 6.4 kilometers as well. So the two phones appear to agree about the distance, and then the two watches appear to agree about the distance. Overall, looking at the GPS tracks of the Grid X2, this looks quite good to me. I still want to do that cycling test, but as a first impression, I think the GPS tracking is not that bad, even quite good actually. But let's now take a look at the heart rate tracking performance during weightlifting. So I'll do a weightlifting session here, probably chest and triceps, and then we'll take a look at those results. And then later today, I'll take a bike ride, and then tomorrow we'll discuss those results. Alright, that was a nice workout, but it's now time to see how the Polar Grid X2 actually did for a weightlifting session. Now the way I analyze my data is kind of complicated and kind of simple, and some of you have been asking how I actually do my analyses. So I'm going to give you a 15-second overview. Right here I have some code that actually loads the data for either the reference device or the device I'm looking at. So this particular code right here loads the data for the Polar Grid X2 using an API, basically a way to communicate with the internet and get your data, called Terra. So I can run that code, and then right here we should see it loading the data, and I think it did. So let's take a look if it's there. And right here we can see actually the 3 workouts I did with it. One of them is a super short test, and we have strength training right here. After that, I'll do the same thing for the reference device, so then both data sets are loaded, and then I'll run some code that can actually compare the two. And this right here is my very ugly code that compares all the watches to the reference device. And this is R code. So the first code was Python, this is R. So that's how I analyze my data, but let's now take a look at the results. The results are in for weightlifting, and you can see them right here in this overview. And you're familiar with this type of plot by now, so we want those points to be as close to the blue line as possible. And somewhat as I expected, most points in the lower heart rate range are close to the blue line, though even there's many points below it, meaning that quite often the Polar Grid X2 detected a too low heart rate, and especially here in the higher heart rate range, most points are below the blue line. And this is a typical pattern we see for many smartwatches when there's a lot of tension on your arm and there's difficulty detecting your heart rate, and it basically detects a way too low heart rate. We can also see that the correlation is quite low now at 0.63, so not good enough for tracking your heart rate during weightlifting. But let's quickly take a look at the weightlifting session itself and then compare it to many watches out there. Here we have the weightlifting session itself. Again, I mostly did chest and triceps. And you can see each of the times I did a set of exercises, there's a peak in my heart rate. So those are those blue peaks. And it's also pretty clear that the Polar Grid X2 wasn't able to detect almost all of them. It might have been able to detect this last peak and a little bit this first peak, but otherwise it basically missed all of them. So always detecting a way too low heart rate. But how does this actually compare to the other Polar models? Well, let's take a look. And you can see that in this overview right here. So a similar overview to before, but now for weightlifting, where again, we want the watches to be as far to the top right as possible. And the Polar Grid X2 is marked in red right here. And it's actually not far from many other Polar devices. So with the same sensor, we have the Polar Grid X2 Pro, also the Polar Vantage M3, and where's the Polar Vantage V3? Let's take a look. I completely missed it, even though it was super close. The Polar Vantage V3 is right here. So all of the ones with the same sensor are close, but we also have some other Polar devices with a different sensor that are close, like the Polar Ignite 3 and also the Polar Pacer Pro. So basically all of the Polar devices are here on the lower end of devices. So at least on me, Polar devices don't do well for weightlifting. But as I've mentioned in many videos, I generally don't recommend using a watch for weightlifting without using an external chest strap. I really recommend adding that external chest strap, which you can connect to many devices, also the Polar Grid X2, that makes heart rate tracking during weightlifting much more reliable if you need that sort of thing. But actually, since we're still at my computer, I already analyzed the first night of sleep and compared it to the reference device. Let's take a quick peek at that, and then tomorrow we'll take a look at the rest of the data. And you can see those results right here. On top right here, we have the sleep stages according to the reference device. And on the left, the sleep stage is according to the Polar Grid X2. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that if we have perfect agreement, all values along this diagonal should be 100%. And we're actually going to ignore this awake column because the Zmax is reference device. It takes a lot of short awake moments that aren't really awake moments. So we're just going to focus on this part right here. Now let's first take a look at deep sleep agreement. So for this first night, the deep sleep agreement was about 53%, meaning that 53% of what was deep sleep according to the reference device was also deep sleep according to the Polar Grid X2, but also 40% was predicted as light sleep instead. So this is not great, also not the worst I've ever seen, but definitely not great. Light sleep agreement was about 60%, so also pretty average, I would say. And surprisingly, REM sleep agreement actually isn't terrible. This is a sleep stage most devices struggle with, and I'm surprised this looks as good. Now this is just for a single night and just on me, so very poor data to draw any definitive conclusions, but I already wanted to share this with you. We'll take a look at the night itself in a moment. However, I also tested the Polar Vantage M3 when it came out for 2 nights, and I just want to show you that data for reference. So you can see that data right here. And as you can see, this isn't that different. The deep sleep agreement isn't great, even a bit worse in this case. The light sleep agreement is pretty decent, though also not amazing. And the REM sleep agreement is slightly better than expected, though also not great. But let's now take a look at the night itself for the Polar Grid X2. And I actually want to focus on that REM sleep agreement for this night because that was surprisingly good, and you can see that in this overview right here. So we have the reference device on top and the Polar Grid X2 on the bottom, and I marked the REM sleep as detected by the EEG device in red in both plots, and the REM sleep as detected by the Polar Grid X2 is in this column right here, so these red bars. Now you actually go through several sleep cycles each night, each one starting in light sleep and deep sleep and always ending in REM sleep. And for this night I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sleep cycles. And we could sort of see this based on the data of the Polar Grid X2. So this would also say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sleep cycles. So that's pretty good. It's slightly shifted potentially, but overall actually not looking that bad. Though it is pretty obvious that the amount of REM sleep and also the exact location is slightly shifted. But otherwise slightly better than I expected, though I do want to look at that night tomorrow to see if we get better or worse results. Okay, so that's a whole lot of data we just looked at, and we have 2 things left to check that we do tomorrow. First of all, later today I'm going to do an outdoor cycling session, and we want to see, can the Polar Grid X2 track my heart rate during outdoor cycling? And 2, we want to take a look at that second night of sleep stage tracking, because I'm somewhat pleasantly surprised by that first night. It was by no means perfect, and there's definitely better devices out there, but it wasn't terrible. Now this is a very initial review, and even 2 nights of data is not a lot, but I still want to check it at least doubles the data. So we'll do that tomorrow. So I'll see you tomorrow. Good morning. The results are in. I just analyzed the heart rate tracking data for biking and also the new sleep stage tracking data, and they're really interesting. I also made a small error in the sleep stage tracking data, which didn't have a major effect, but I fixed it as well. So we now have the final sleep tracking data and also that heart rate tracking data. So let's move on to the computer and have a look at that. I was actually somewhat surprised at how different the results were than I expected. So they're actually a bit better than I expected. So let's take a look, and here we have the heart rate tracking data. So these are the results for 2 short bike rides that I did, with again the reference along the horizontal axis and the Polar Grid X2 along the vertical axis. And we do see most points are on or close to the blue line, which is good. And this is better than I expected because previously Polar models really struggled on me. We do have a few of these ribbons right here, both below the blue line, but also above it, indicating that at least sometimes there was likely a delay in picking up on an increase or decrease in heart rate. The correlation is also quite okay-ish for biking outside. It's definitely not great, but I've seen worse at 0.82. I don't know if this will be good enough for me, but let's take a look at the individual 2 bike rides to see how well the heart rate of the Polar Grid X2 match with my actual heart rate. I have that first short bike ride with again the reference in blue-green and the Polar Grid X2 in red. And there's a pretty decent agreement in terms of heart rate. However, it does seem that the Polar Grid X2 misses some of the details. So the overall patterns match, but for instance here where there's a quick decrease in my heart rate, the Polar Grid X wasn't able to pick up on that, or here there's a quick increase in my heart rate and there was a delay in the Polar Grid X2 picking up on that. But overall actually a bit better than I expected. And we actually see something similar for this bike ride right here. Some of the details are missed, so there's sometimes a delay like right here and picking up on that increase in heart rate. But the overall patterns aren't terrible. They're also not great for sure, but they're somehow a bit better than what I've seen before from Polar. Now again, this is a very limited initial test, but this at least shows that potentially this somewhat lighter watch did do a bit better on me. But let's compare these results to that of many other devices I've tested before. And you can see that in this overview right here, where again we want the devices to be as far to the top right as possible. And here the Polar Grid X2 is somewhere in the middle of the pack. It's not terrible, but also not great. And it's actually quite close to, for instance, some Garmin devices right here, like the Instinct 2 and Enduro 3, Venue 3. So similar to Garmin, which is not bad, given that Polar usually does worse on me. For instance, here we have the Polar Ignite 3, which didn't do that great on me. or the Polar Grid X2 Pro right here, which is also a bit worse, and the Polar Pacer Pro as well right here. So it definitely did a bit better than those, at least in this initial testing. But what about other Polar devices? I would be, for instance, especially interested in the Polar Vantage M3, since that's also a lighter watch with the same sensor. And we can find that right here. And that actually seems to have done quite well. Maybe even in a somewhat similar range as the Grid X2, or even a bit better. Again, I did limited testing on both, so I need to do more testing. But it does appear that potentially the lighter weight actually has a positive effect. So to get an overall impression of your general heart rate patterns, the Grid X2 actually isn't the worst device out there. I actually somewhat expected for it to do a little bit worse, but if we look at the Polar Vantage M3, it also wasn't that bad. So it makes some sense we get these results. Now again, if you want the best heart rate tracking out there, the Pixel Watch 3 and the Apple Watch are definitely the best devices I've tested. And also some Huawei devices, like for instance the new Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro also didn't do bad at all. And also an older device like an Apple Watch SE 2022 or a Huawei Watch Fit 2 did well in my testing as well. So these are the final results for heart rate tracking, and I'm honestly quite pleasantly surprised with how the Polar Grid X2 performed. It's not great for sure, but somehow I expected a bit of a worse performance since that Elixir sensor generally doesn't do well on me, and this wasn't half bad. But what about the sleep stage tracking? We now have 2 nights, and I made a small correction also for that first night, so let's take a look at those results. And these right here are the final sleep stage tracking results for those 2 nights I looked at, with again the reference device on top and the Polar Grid X2 on the left, where each column sums to 100%, and if they perfectly agreed, all values on the diagonal right here should be 100%. And overall, this is sort of a decent mediocre performance. So all the values on the diagonal are above 50%, which not all devices reach. Especially REM sleep stage tracking is surprisingly good. This is where many devices struggle. And at least the Polar Grid X2 did decently for that. It also did decently for deep sleep and also pretty good for light sleep. Not great by any means, there are better devices out there. But given that all of these are above 50%, that doesn't look too bad. But let's take a look at those individual nights, because this will help us understand it even better. And before I got started with the second night, I quickly wanted to mention the fix that I did for the first night. So before, there was actually a slight shift between the EEG device and the Grid X2 Pro, maybe by 5 minutes or so the nights didn't perfectly align. I always allow for some shifting to happen, but because of some timestamp issues, basically there was a 5-minute shift roughly, which didn't give them perfect agreement. But now you can see that, for instance, these awake moments align up perfectly. So here we have an awake moment according to the EEG device, and this perfectly matches also with the Grid X2. We can also see that right here for these 2 awake moments, these nicely match up. So now we fixed that, so that gives a slightly higher percentage in the overview we saw before. But of course, we also have a second night now, and this is that second night. This is the night just now that I woke up from, and we see a pretty decent agreement, I would say, between the reference device on top and the Polar Grid X2 on the bottom. For instance, looking at deep sleep right now, we see that most of the deep sleep detected by the EEG device was also detected by the Grid X2, but some extra deep sleep was also detected, especially here near the end of the night where I rarely have any deep sleep. And we also see some extra deep sleep detected right here, and also some missed deep sleep right here and right here. And if we look at the REM sleep instead right here, this also looks pretty decent, though not amazing. So we can see I had 4 clear REM sleep segments, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And 3 out of 4 of these were also detected by the Grid X2. So again, not the correct length and not the exact positioning we want. We can see, for instance, this 4th one sort of was detected, but not completely, and also shifted quite a bit. So I wouldn't say it actually detected this last one. And we can see there's generally too little REM sleep detected in these first 3 segments. Now, in terms of how many sleep cycles I had, I likely had actually 5 sleep cycles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where I had basically no REM sleep in my first sleep cycle. This appears to be a somewhat special characteristic that I have, where my first sleep cycle has very little REM sleep, usually a small sliver, which wasn't detected by the EEG device in this case. And actually the Polar Grid X2 did detect some REM sleep right here at the end of that first sleep cycle. And I think just the algorithm expects there to be REM sleep, so it puts it here. So in reality, I usually have very little or no REM sleep detected by, for instance, EEG, like the one we used right here, or even the professional one called PSG, I just have very little to no REM sleep in that first sleep cycle. And I actually understand that this is hard for a device like the Grid X2 to pick up on, because this is not the usual type of sleep stage pattern, so not something it's been trained on. But there are devices that are better at this, so let's compare this performance to that of many other devices out there. And that's displayed in this overview, where we see the results for many devices I've tested in the past. So along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. And the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. So the best performing devices in this case are the H-Sleep Pod, the Nucor app, the Apple Watch, and potentially the Oura Ring. And we can find the Polar Grid X2 right here. So it's definitely not doing terrible, but also not doing great. Its average agreement over those 3 sleep stages is about 59%. So somewhere in the middle of devices. If we compare it to some other devices from Polar, like the Polar Pacer Pro right here, it isn't that far off from that. However, in my testing, only for a few nights, the Polar Vantage M3 actually did a little bit worse than the Polar Grid X2. I actually don't expect a different performance from either of them, because they're likely using the exact same algorithm, so should get the exact same result, especially because they also have the same sensor. But overall, it's sort of a mediocre performer. Not really bad, not really great. There are definitely many worse devices out there, like for instance different Galaxy watches, which aren't that great, at least in my testing, but especially different Chinese devices, like devices from Huawei or Xiaomi. But like I said, there's also many better devices out there. The top 4, as I mentioned before, are H-Sleep, which is my favorite sleep tracking and sleep improvement device. It actually actively cools and heats each side of the bed, so it's my favorite device in summer when it's so hot, and I just sleep so much better, especially with that new H-Sleep Pod 5 that has both the blanket cooling and also the surface of the bed. It's really amazing, but also really expensive, so only buy it if you can really afford it. Never spend more money than you can comfortably afford. Also, the Apple Watch is a great sleep stage tracker, at least on me. The Nucor app, which is now called Sleep 2, also does really well, but it's really specialized just for sleep stage tracking. And the Oura Ring also generally does well. In the second tier of devices, as regular viewers will know, we have different Fitbit devices. And Fitbit is actually quite cheap sometimes, so you can get decent sleep stage tracking for a relatively affordable price. And Google, which owns Fitbit, also makes Pixel watches, and these have the exact same sleep stage tracking as Fitbits, so it's also pretty decent. And the Whoop strap is also pretty good at sleep stage tracking. So that's my top 6, I would say. So H-Sleep, really my favorite device, but the most expensive. Apple, a little bit more affordable. Sleep 2 or Nucor, which is a subscription service, so it can be cheap or expensive depending on how long you use it. Oura, Whoop, and Google/Fitbit. And Polar in general is somewhere in the middle of devices, together with, for instance, Garmin. Sometimes some Galaxy watches, sometimes they do a little bit worse. So I find it a bit difficult to classify Galaxy watches. They might actually be more similar to Polar and Garmin compared to what I originally said. But my general impression is that they're a tiny bit worse than them. And then Huawei and Xiaomi, the Chinese brands, really don't do well at all. Okay, so that was a lot of data and a lot of testing, but what is my overall conclusion on the Polar Grid X2? Well, in some ways I was actually pleasantly surprised. It was quite okay at heart rate tracking, a bit better than some other Polar devices I tested previously. It was okay at sleep stage tracking, and I would say the GPS actually looked pretty good, though again I wasn't able to do that cycling test, which would give me more definitive results, but the GPS actually looked pretty good. Wait, let me put you down for a second. So overall, putting everything together, the heart rate tracking, the sleep stage tracking, and the GPS tracking, it feels like it always ends up somewhere in the middle. For the GPS tracking, maybe a little bit to the better side of the middle, and for the heart rate tracking, maybe just slightly to the worse side of the middle. But overall, sort of a mediocre, decent performance. And that's actually a bit better than we've seen for some other Polar devices in the past, on me at least, because Polar devices just seem to have trouble tracking my heart rate, and it actually did a little bit better than I expected. I think the lower weight compared to the Polar Grid X2 Pro actually gives it some advantages, so it won't rock on my wrist as much, and it's just much more stable, so the platform is a bit better to measure. And the sleep stage tracking of Polar also isn't terrible. You will get sort of a general impression, though as as I showed you in that graph, there are definitely better devices out there. So who would I recommend the Polar Grid X2 for, and should you get the Polar Grid X2? Well, it really depends what your focus is. If you like the Polar ecosystem and you like that they haven't really introduced some kind of expensive subscription model, then it's actually quite nice. Given that Garmin, for instance, now also has a premium subscription service, I think more and more of the new features for Garmin will just be introduced in that tier and not in the free tier. And given that Polar at least seems to be less focused on having that paid tier, maybe you'll get more features for free with Polar devices. But this is a speculation, of course. If you want accurate heart rate tracking, I wouldn't just rely on the watch. In addition, I would just get yourself a chest strap, and then you get reliable heart rate tracking with the device like the Polar Grid X2 as well. And I actually grew to like the design of this watch. So it's rugged but not too big. For me, the bezel with the different compass markings is still a bit too much, but I get in sort of an outdoor watch it can be useful and also sort of matches the aesthetic of what they're trying to convey with the watch. In terms of sleep stage tracking, again, you'll probably get some general impression, though not all the details. So if your focus is really on sleep stage tracking, then I cannot recommend the Polar Grid X2. But if you just want to get a general impression of your sleep quality, it's probably good enough. And the GPS tracking is pretty decent. So if you're an outdoorsy person, you like the Polar ecosystem, or you're at least willing to get into that, and maybe you're not too much into sleep stage tracking, but you want decent battery life and decent GPS tracking, then definitely you can get it. However, if instead you're more interested in tracking your sleep quality and recovery, you need a good app with decent sleep stage tracking. And in those cases, I would either recommend an Oura ring, so a ring that tracks your sleep, which is not good at workout tracking, but is good at sleep stage tracking and has a really good app. Or the Whoop strap, I'm testing a bunch of them right now, which has pretty decent sleep stage tracking and a really good app, and is also a pretty good workout tracker. So in that scenario, those are my two top recommendations. Also, the H Sleep Pod has really good sleep stage tracking, but it's really expensive, so again, only get that if you can afford it. Then if your focus is on heart rate tracking without wearing a chest strap, I would recommend an Apple Watch or a Pixel Watch, or if you want to go a bit cheaper, some Huawei devices are also quite good. And if pure GPS tracking is your focus, the Polar Grid X2 might actually be good enough, and also Garmin has good alternatives, and even Coros, which is a bit cheaper than Garmin, also has pretty good GPS tracking. So that's my general recommendation. Anybody I talk to in real life about making YouTube videos about smartwatches, they always ask me which is the best, and there's no single best. It really depends on your particular situation. So I can definitely recommend the Polar Grid X2 to some people, but you really need to fit that category that I described. Now, if you do decide in the end to get a Polar Grid X2, a Garmin device, a Whoop strap maybe, an Oura ring, an H Sleep Pod, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, you want to support the channel and for many of them get a great discount, you can find my affiliate links below. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Polar Grid X2, I think you'll like this video on the new Whoop strap, or this video on the best sleep stage trackers.